A millionaire knocked on his employee's door, but what he found inside changed everything. The storm raged outside as thunder rattled the windows of Richard Lawson's luxury car. For a man who controlled empires, tonight he couldn't control his own restless heart. Something, he couldn't explain what, was pulling him toward a quiet street on the other side of town. He told his driver to stop without giving a reason. In the pouring rain, Richard stepped out and stared at a small, dimly lit house, its roof patched with tin, its walls worn by time. Why here? Why tonight? Even he didn't know. But something told him, behind that fragile wooden door, he was about to discover a truth money could never buy. When he finally knocked, the door creaked open. And what Richard saw inside would shatter everything he thought he knew about wealth, strength, and love. Richard Lawson wasn't just another businessman. He was the name printed on skyscrapers, the face on magazine covers, the man others envied for his wealth and power. Yet, success had come with a hidden cost, loneliness. His mansion echoed with silence, his dinners were often for one, and though the world called him powerful, he sometimes felt powerless over his own heart. That evening, after a long boardroom session, Richard had noticed something about one of his employees, Daniel Carter. Daniel had been with the company for 8 years, never late, never loud, never demanding. But today, Richard had caught something in his eyes, a quiet pain behind his polite smile. It disturbed him. So much so that instead of driving home, Richard found himself following Daniel's address, a detail he had once seen in HR files but never thought he'd use. And now here he was, standing in the rain, at his employee's modest doorstep. "Mr. Lawson." Daniel's voice trembled in shock when he opened the door. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly messy, and his eyes widened at the sight of his billionaire boss dripping wet on his porch. Richard cleared his throat. I was nearby. Thought I'd stop by. May I?" Daniel hesitated. He glanced back into the house, then nodded. "Of course, sir. Please, come in." The warmth of the small home wrapped around Richard as he stepped inside. The living room was modest, with faded curtains and furniture that had clearly seen better days, but everything was spotless. A faint aroma of vegetable soup lingered in the air. On the wall hung crayon drawings of flowers, stars, and smiling faces. And then Richard saw her. In the corner sat a little girl, about 10, with sparkling brown eyes. She was in a wheelchair, humming softly while coloring a paper. She looked up and smiled at Richard with an innocence that pierced his guarded heart. "This is my daughter, Lily," Daniel said softly. Richard walked closer. "Hello, Lily." "Hi," she replied cheerfully, though her legs remained still under the blanket. Richard's throat tightened. He turned back to Daniel. "Why didn't you ever mention her?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Because work is work, sir. I never wanted pity. I just wanted to do my job well." They sat together at the small dining table. Daniel poured Richard a cup of tea, though his hands trembled slightly from nerves. As they talked, Richard discovered truths that shook him. Daniel worked 2 jobs, his paycheck stretched thin between rent, bills, and Lily's treatments. Yet, despite the exhaustion, he came to work every day with dignity, never complaining, never asking for more. Richard felt ashamed. He had spent millions on art, cars, and parties, yet one of his most loyal employees was quietly carrying a weight far greater than any financial report. "Why didn't you ever ask for help?" Richard finally asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Because, sir, pride feeds no one. But it keeps a man standing. Lily, she deserves a father who stands." The words hit Richard like lightning. For all his wealth, could he say he stood for anyone? His empire made profits, yes, but had he touched lives? Truly touched them? As the evening grew late, Lily showed Richard her drawings, dreams of becoming an artist one day. One picture, in particular, made him pause. It was a sketch of a big house with bright windows and children playing in the yard. "That's my dream," Lily whispered. "A place where Daddy doesn't have to worry anymore." Richard left that night with those words echoing in his soul. When he lay in his mansion's king-sized bed, the silence felt heavier than ever. For the first time in years, he cried. The next morning, Richard made a decision. Not as a CEO, but as a man who had finally realized what true wealth meant. Weeks later, Daniel returned home after a long shift. On his porch sat a brand-new wheelchair, lighter and more advanced than anything he could have afforded. Beside it was an envelope. Inside was a letter written in Richard's own hand. "True wealth is not measured by what we own, but by the lives we touch. Thank you for reminding me of that. All of Lily's medical expenses will be covered, no strings attached. Consider it an honor to stand beside a man as strong as you." Daniel's hands shook as tears streamed down his face. He hugged Lily tightly, whispering, "We're going to be okay, baby. We're really going to be okay." Lily's laughter filled the room like sunshine. For the first time in years, hope wasn't just a distant dream, it was right there, alive in their little home. But Richard didn't stop there. He launched new programs in his company to support employees with children who had medical needs, scholarships for their education, and wellness funds for families. What began as a visit to one small house turned into a movement that transformed thousands of lives. And as for Richard, he found himself returning to Daniel's home often, not as a boss, but as a friend. Sometimes he brought art supplies for Lily, other times he just sat with them for dinner. Slowly, his own mansion didn't feel so empty anymore. Because sometimes, it takes the quiet courage of ordinary people to remind the powerful what true greatness really is. Wealth is not about what you accumulate, it's about what you give. And sometimes, one unplanned knock on a humble door can open the way to a life forever changed.